Wonderful. Can everyone see my screen? Excellent. Great. We are going to begin with a welcome. Welcome to our Co-op 101, hosted by PACA, the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. We are so happy to have you here. If you haven't already, we would love for you to check in via chat. You can share your name, pronouns, your role or organization if you're here representing an organization tonight, and what inspired you to attend today. Please, yes, you can drop it in the chat. And if you are able or you want to come off mute and introduce yourself that way, that is also welcome. And so folks know things that are put into the chat will not be interpreted unless they're read out loud. So we'll have a practice of doing that throughout this meeting. And I'll do a little bit more housekeeping afterwards, but would love to hear, where are you all calling in from? Wait a second.
Calling in from Lenny Lenape land, also known as Philly. Glad to be here. My name's Corey.
Hey, Corey, good to have you. Let's see. And it's nice to see some familiar faces and names. Hi, Susan.
Hey,
welcome everyone.
nice to be here.
Wonderful. We've got Lucia, Elisa, folks from Philly, Chicago, New Orleans. And please continue to check in. Really excited to have you here. Grateful that this 101 has reached outside of Philly borders and looking forward to continuing to build with you all. Awesome. So at PACA, we tend to do a purpose order process, sort of grounding. This is our roadmap for today. Because the process and the order are pretty intertwined, you just see two of those. The purpose of tonight's event is to learn more about cooperative models in general. And the order in which we'll do that is that I will be presenting and we'll have an open Q&A at the end. But y'all are welcome to ask questions as we go and use the chat. Again, I'll emphasize that things put in the chat won't be interpreted unless read out loud. And I will be asking my teammates to read out loud things, clarifying questions, and I welcome those throughout. If there's something that you need to have answered that won't make sense unless you have it answered, please feel free to stop me. If there are questions that I think might make more sense, that are maybe bigger picture, might make more sense for our Q&A, just know that we will note those and come back to them at the end. But please feel free to interrupt me for clarifying questions. I want folks to be able to follow along. And a little bit about me. My name is Amethyst Carey. I think I didn't start with that. My name is Amethyst Carey. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a co-op developer here at PACA and a member of the PACA Staff Collective. I joined PACA in 2021, and the two main roles that I hold here is that I manage the Study Circles program, which is an educational 6-month program where folks can come together and study what it might look like to explore a cooperative or apply cooperative principles to an issue in their neighborhood. I work with Corey very closely on the build track of that program. And the second thing that I do at PACA is managing our Seed Commons lending program. I know that Susan also works with Seed Commons, and Seed Commons is a national network with local peers that work to bring non-extractive financing to cooperatives. So those are the two things that I do here. I've been involved with co-ops for almost a decade, which is pretty wild, with a focus mainly and experience in housing co-ops, and worker ownership. So that's a little bit about me. I love co-ops. I was so excited to figure out that I could do this full time and as a profession, and I will definitely be inserting my little personal tidbits into this Co-op 101. So looking forward to learning and sharing with you all. Wonderful. So we'll start. PACA's mission statement is to improve the lives of people in the Philadelphia region by supporting democratically organized businesses, promoting the principles of international cooperative movement, and growing the cooperative economy. And I will just be skimming some of PACA's guiding values, but they feel important and meaningful to mention. First, self-determination and cooperation. Community-owned wealth and democracy. Solidarity and care. And we want to also highlight some of our members. We have more members than are listed here, but really, really proud to be a co-op of co-ops, where we are able to improve the life of folks in the Philadelphia region by really supporting the local cooperative businesses here. So here are some of them that we're proud to be associated with. Wonderful. And I'd also like to read this land acknowledgement. This was provided to us by the tribe that is listed at the bottom of the page. Because of the length of the text, it'll be split into three slides. So I'll begin. The land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape, called Lenape Hoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. The Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation, the Ramapo Lenape Nation, and the Powhatan Lenape Nation, the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Chesworld, Delaware. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of the Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanen that there be harmony and indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants of this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. And at PACA, we really like to be rooted in this practice of acknowledgement and recognize the limitations of reading something that is written. We really want to encourage others to not only read land acknowledgements, but also match the words with their actions. A suggestion by the folks who pulled this together is to, whenever reading a land acknowledgement, also move some money to the tribes who lived on this land that we are acknowledging. And I'll mention a way that PACA is working to match our words and action is by thinking about donating a portion of all of our income to the Lenni Lenape every year. And so encourage folks to not only read these, but also think about how we can take tangible action to support land back and to support the indigenous peoples who have been on this land and will continue to be on this land. Wonderful. So the first thing I like to do, though I will be doing some presenting, obviously, I love interactions. I know folks maybe didn't sign up, but we won't be doing breakout groups, but medium interactions will definitely be happening. And this is one of them. I really love to start off by lifting up the wisdom in the room and the experience in the room. And so I ask this question to everyone here. What are the feelings, words, or associations that come to mind when you hear the word cooperative? There is no wrong answer. Would love to hear folks throw some answers into the chat or come off mute if you're comfortable to share with the room. Anything, feelings, words, associations, you know a cooperative business. Wonderful. I see in the chat, sharing, reciprocity, community care. Awesome. What else have y'all heard? Collective hive mind. I assume something drew you to the 101, so I know y'all have thoughts. Happy to be patient. And again, if you're driving or unable to put things in the chat, I welcome you to come off mute. Belonging. Awesome. I also see solidarity. Creative tension and sense of shared purpose. Ooh. Democratic participation and community wealth building. Yes, collective work and responsibility. Love to see it. Love to see it. Worker focused, high employee morale. Yes. Awesome. Anyone else want to share in the chat or out loud? Wonderful. This is a great list to start. And I see a lot of alignment, which is awesome, and some different perspectives. I know collective work and responsibility is a principle of African diaspora that I love, love, love to see lifted up here, talking about working conditions and thinking about high employee morale, democratic participation and wealth building, very, very important. And I love this creative tension and sense of shared purpose. Hopefully we'll have some space to dive into that. Yeah, shared goals and benefits, absolutely. I am pleased to see so many positive things in the chat. I know I'll say often, and depending on who I'm speaking to, some folks maybe have never ever heard of co-ops, or maybe their only association with co-ops. I know, and I'll speak frankly, when I first was presented with the idea, I thought that co-ops were for hippies. I assumed that co-ops were very white. I wasn't sure if they were for me until I got to participate in them and learn a little bit more about their history. So again, I really welcome all the experiences and associations that people are lifting up here today, and excited to see how they align with what we'll be sharing. Yes, oh, and I want to uplift one more in the chat from Charity: attempts to curb harms of racial capitalism. Absolutely. We'll be talking a lot about that today. So the definition of a co-op from the International Cooperative Association, the ICA, is that that cooperatives are an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. That is thorough and very wordy. And we're going to pull out the little parts of this in the next slide. I like to share this definition because I think it's always meaningful if big groups of people can come together and agree on something. I always want to highlight that. And the way that I tend to talk about co-ops and break it down for folks is into two sort of main categories, two buckets. And they are shared ownership and democratic control. So I think that some folks spoke to shared power in decision making, and that really shows up in the democratic control. Co-ops are sort of characterized by the one member, one vote. That might be something that people are familiar with, really representing that to be a part of a co-op is to participate in a democratic governance structure where every member has the same weight. That's different than in other traditional corporations. And I might fall into that language of traditional. I like to stay away from it because who decided what traditional is? I'll say non-cooperative, and y'all can hold me to that as well. In non-cooperative forms of businesses, often the amount of say, of vote, of sway that you have in a business is determined by how much money you've invested. And I think it is really meaningful and important to say that it is not about financial contribution, but about you as a human being a member, and that gives you the same weight and vote as everybody else in the cooperative. So that's what we mean by democratic control. Very, very important. And the other pillar is shared ownership. And so the cooperative entity exists, again, to share the ownership of the business and the responsibilities of running the business amongst all of the members of the co-op. And so that shared ownership is not only about the day-to-day management of the business, but also shows up in how profits are distributed. So in non-cooperative businesses, how profits are distributed is completely up to the owner most of the time, or the investors. So the owner can decide, yes, I'll be generous, I'll keep a lot and share a little. But in a cooperative, it is decided by all of the members of the co-op what will be done with any profits that are made from the business. And so often workers will receive those profits, they'll decide what to do with those profits, either getting them distributed to each individual member or deciding to reinvest those profits back in the business. And the way that each co-op decides to do that is decided by the members of the cooperative. Awesome. Okay. In addition to those two pillars, We like to ground our work in the cooperative principles. Again, these are things that folks have come together to say this is the backbone and the hallmark of a cooperative business is aligning with cooperative principles. Often you'll see that these are, in some places, they're mandated to be a part of a cooperative's bylaws. So I'll read through these. There are 7. The first is voluntary and open membership. Folks get to join the cooperative of their own accord. No one is forced to join. Democratic member control. Again, emphasizing that one member, one vote. Member economic participation, and that represents the financial contribution that each member makes to join the co-op. Again, the amount is dependent on the cooperative and what they decide to do together, but that economic participation really does represent I am invested and contributing and bought in to the co-op. Autonomy and independence. This value represents, ensuring that no one in the co-op is going to act against the co-op's interests. We want the co-op to remain independent and able to make the best decision for the members versus being influenced by outside forces. Education, training, and information, which is one of my favorites, and I think a really, really important principle. I think the only way that you can actually have open membership where anyone can join is to make sure that you're doing the work to educate and inform folks who might have new things to learn and different things to offer to the co-op. And so I really like to emphasize that it's very important, and part of that education is folks showing up here and being able to have these sort of one-on-one sessions and hopefully translate them into routine spaces for learning and growth in your cooperative. Principle 6, maybe the most famous principle in the cooperative sector is cooperation among cooperatives. And I really appreciate this one and think it's really, really relevant in our hyper-capitalist world to recognize that co-ops as businesses who are most concerned about community and members over profit are already really, the cards are stacked against them in a world where businesses will do anything to get ahead and maximize a profit, in a world where businesses will hurt the earth to get as much money as they can, exploit their workers to get as much money as they can. Cooperative businesses, if they are really operating in accordance with these principles and values, will not do that. And so the way, just like with anything else, especially with organizing, right? The way that we are able to be successful is by working together. And I love that this is codified in this principle. And so we hope to see co-ops working together, not competing for the value in and of itself, but also to be able to survive and compete in a world where people are not moving in accordance to some of the values that I hope that the folks here hold near and dear. And then the last thing I'll mention that I think is woven in and through all of this is concern for community. Cooperatives are started to address a community need and benefit the members, not just to maximize a profit. And so these are the 7 cooperative principles. I think they're really important. I love to hear people lift them up. And yeah, this is kind of the foundation, the 3 things that I hope that if you leave this webinar and somebody asks, what do you know about co-ops? It's that they are democratically governed and owned by members and adhere to the cooperative principles. Great. So at this point, we're going to shift and talk about the different models of co-ops. I know that people mentioned some worker co-ops in the chat earlier, and these are some common models. I love our field. We are quite innovative. And so there are more and more different ways that people come together and cooperate, but these are some of the core ones that I think would be helpful for everyone to know. Ooh, we've got cool transition. This is a customized template I learn every time I do it. Okay, great. So the first model is consumer-owned co-ops. There we go. So consumer-owned co-ops exist to meet the needs of consumers and community. They aim to coalesce the buying power of individuals to be able to access things at the best cost possible. And some common examples of these consumer-owned co-ops are things like CSAs, a community-supported agriculture, utilities, And so folks might be familiar with rural electric co-ops, with cable co-ops. And again, they exist in urban areas as well, but I think in areas that are really underserved, they're a great example of being able to come together, pool resources, and get access to things that sometimes larger companies just wouldn't be willing to offer to just one or two people. Credit unions are also an example of a financial cooperative and a consumer-owned cooperative. I myself am a member of PFCU here in Philly. And I think a lot of people, myself included, when I was newer to this space, don't realize that credit unions are financial cooperatives, but they are. And they are designed ideally to, again, bring that profit back to the consumers versus maximizing it for an external shareholder. And then finally, housing co-ops. Often in this field, housing co-ops are sort of their own camp. They are technically a consumer cooperative, but often people will just have speak about housing co-ops as their own sector. But housing co-ops are cooperatives that are owned by are cooperatives owned by the folks who live in them. So there is not a landlord, and instead the tenants or the folks who live there come together to maintain the house, keep it up, administer rent. And as I mentioned earlier, housing co-ops were, I've spent the longest time in housing co-ops, living in them. I've learned so much, and I know that there are all these different forms of it as well. So excited to see how the housing co-op sector has grown. I won't stay there for too long. That's consumer owned. Worker-owned cooperatives. So worker-owned cooperatives are businesses that are owned by the workers. They're designed to meet the needs of the workers. So in a worker-owned cooperative, you're able to, often because workers are coming together and saying, what do we need first and foremost, you'll often find stronger benefits within a worker-owned cooperative. They might prioritize safe working conditions. Again, because the profits are distributed by the workers, and decided how they are distributed is decided by the workers. You are often able to build more wealth through profit sharing in these businesses than you might in a non-cooperative business. Job security, also a really, really huge thing with a worker-owned cooperative. You are able to set the terms for what your job looks like and make decisions with your other peers, versus being afraid or fearful of a big boss who maybe without good communication might yank your job out from under you. And we don't go into depth about this in this Co-op 101, again, because we can only cover so much with the time that we have. But there are lots of studies and data that shows that in times of economic recession or on hard times, you see cooperative businesses, including worker-owned businesses, really stick around. That is because you have a higher level of worker investment, and also because it keeps the money circulated in the neighborhood. And so I think that job security is both about what are the culture and conditions in the workplace that make you feel safe and also functionally provide job safety. And also there's a more grounded form of business that really is invested in sticking around versus outsourcing or shipping jobs somewhere else. And then the last thing with worker-owned cooperatives, democratic participation. Again, a hallmark of all cooperatives, obviously a very big part of worker ownership as well. Okay, move to the next slide. Producer-owned co-ops. And we've got one listed there with Lancaster Farm Fresh. So producer-owned co-ops exist to meet the needs of producers. And so producers are folks who are coming together, who sell similar goods or services, who are able to maximize their markets, who they're able to reach by working together and forming a cooperative. So you often see this in the agricultural field and in others, but I think one of the most common examples are farm co-ops who, if you are a small family farm, it might be harder for you to be able to amass the amount of product to maybe capitalize on an opportunity. Or if you're a small family farm, you can't be everywhere. You can't be at every market. And so by coming together, With other small farms, you're able to do some shared buying. Maybe you can do advertising together. Maybe you are able to get that big client because in partnership with Farm A and Farm B, you do have enough product to make it onto a shelf that you might not have been able to. And so all of those things, again, are listed here on the slide: access to markets, shared resources, competitive advantage. I think in addition to Lancaster Farm Fresh, which folks in Philly might be familiar with, some other producer-owned co-ops that I think are well known. Ocean Spray is a producer-owned co-op. I know that I didn't know that. I think that for some folks who might be on the internet, there is a TikTok trend going around with Ocean Spray that I think also brought the fact that they were a co-op to many more people's eyes, which I think is always fun. And that's producer-owned co-ops. And then purchasing and shared services. So again, the purpose here, like with all cooperatives, they're owned and operated by their members. And the idea is similar, maybe in reverse to the producer, where folks are coming together to purchase goods and services. And by coming together, you're maybe able to buy in bulk, maximize savings by working together. And so there's a great group called the Community Purchasing Alliance that some folks on this call might be familiar with. In terms of shared services, maybe there are separate businesses who are all paying a lot for payroll. And actually, because they're in network with each other, they could come together and decide, why don't we all hire the same person and maybe negotiate a contract together and save us all a lot of money. So those are just some examples of what that can look like. And some of the needs that might come up within this form: operational support, back-end support, financial management, and again, being able to really do what you can do to get better prices, availability, and delivery of services. Wonderful. And the last form, I believe, that we'll talk about is multi-stakeholder or hybrid. And very similar to what the title suggests, those are cooperatives that bring together different forms some of the different models that we just chatted about. I think a really common one that folks probably have seen and experienced are worker-consumer hybrids. You often see that you're seeing that more and more now in the food co-op sector, where you will have a consumer co-op, right? So the folks who shop at the food co-op are members of the cooperative, in addition to worker co-op. The people who work at the food co-op are also members of the cooperative. And so that multi-stakeholder model allows, as it says here on the slide, a broad benefit and interest, and some shared governance, which I think can operate as a check and balance of power, and also hopefully, ideally, more space to come together and vision and work strategically to achieve both stakeholders' goals. Wonderful. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. And for a lot of people who are, well, I'll speak for myself. I do think many, and I'll say for me, when I was first starting to learn about cooperatives, often the history, the overview starts with Rochdale and the Rochdale pioneers who came together in Europe in the early 1800s and formed what is often cited as the first cooperative. And I think that history is really important. From that came, the ICA and our principles and some early articulations of unity across different cooperatives. And I think sometimes that very Western, very white history being cited as the starting point discourages a lot of people who don't align with that background from feeling at home with cooperation. And what really blew my mind when I was first learning about it was, I learned the white Western history and I was like, I still think these are kind of cool. But then the deeper I dug, the more I actually uncovered that for many Black and Brown folks, we have long, long, long lineages of cooperation. That is how our ancestors were able to survive. And we continue to practice that now, whether it's formally or informally. And so I want to honor the traditions and the Western traditions that have led us here, and also really want to emphasize that there is so, so, so much more to cooperation in this country and around the world. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to share a brief clip. And I am going to need to take a second to make sure I can pull up the Spanish subtitles. So appreciate the patience as I get that settled.
Some of the documents in your book go all the way back to slavery times.
Right. So definitely for slavery, we're talking about informal cooperative economics, so not an official co-op business or something, but just collectively raising money to buy somebody's freedom. So people would share, like one person might buy themselves out, then they would save money to buy their mother or their daughter or their wife or their father or that kind of thing. So that level of collectivity, people even consider the Underground Railroad to be a kind of collective activity, sort of collective economics, sharing of resources, that kind of thing. But the more official kind of relationships I found were what's called mutual aid societies.
And that was around funerals and doctors' visits and
Yep.
things like that?
Yep. Health, death, health, widows and orphans, that kind of thing. And basically it was everybody puts in a certain amount every year or every month, and then whoever needs it gets to take it out.
So going forward, what's the next big chapter or moment?
Let's see if I can get myself out. Wonderful. Okay, are folks still able to see the screen? Great. So I like to start with that, and I'll say Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard is a pioneer and is one of the first and very few people who really dedicated herself to deep study of African American practices of cooperation. Her work was foundational to the beginning of PACA Study Circles program and the values that we try to live in as we do cooperative education. And I really appreciate how she lifted up that, yes, maybe it's not the formal incorporated cooperatives that we are used to, but people were absolutely working together to buy themselves freedom, to ensure their safety. I think lots of folks often don't know that many of our civil rights leaders actually got their start in cooperatives and were cooperative organizers in their time. And so again, this is talking about Black American experience, but I think it is a great example of really lifting up that we have as much of a right to cooperation as Black and Brown folks as anybody else, and that we really have been doing it and continuing to do it. When I did a cooperative 101 exercise for a youth group, the exercise that we did that I won't do today, but I will share with y'all, was asking the room, who here has ever come together and pooled money for chips, right, to get snacks after lunch? Or who here shares their Netflix passwords with their friends and family? Who here, buys food with their neighbors, or has a habit of, doing dinner over at a friend's house and rotating? And while, those things are not formal cooperatives, they are very genuinely examples of practicing cooperative principles. And as someone who's been involved in organizing, I really recognize how important it is to be precise with our words, lest people take them and run away with them, right? Or decide that they mean something else. And I think it's really important to strike that balance of recognizing the benefit, what can be possible with formal cooperatives, and recognizing that for a lot of us, it is in our blood and in our heritage and our lineage, even if we practice it in different ways, and in ways that are not always recognized by the law and the state. And so I really just wanted to take that time to name that and lift that up. And I am curious if anybody wants to share out loud or in the chat, hearing that, right? We've got these formal models also paired with these cultural ways of being and practicing cooperation. Is there anyone here who would be open to sharing? Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like there are ways that in your culture, in your background, or in your family that you have practiced cooperation or cooperative principles? I'll pause and see. Yes, and I am noticing things in the chat. Again, feel free to put things in the chat or come off mute. I see another great book on the history of Black cooperativism by Dr. Monica White. I have that book right behind me. I will not get off screen to search for it, but an amazing, amazing book. Thank you so much for lifting that up, Charity. Absolutely, family businesses, right? There are so many family businesses, corner stores, bodegas that may not formally work together, but absolutely informally cooperate. And I love and appreciate lifting that up. Yes, sharing the stars account. Oh my gosh, every one of my friends has a different streaming platform. We're all just on each other's. And with them, because we cooperate, I have access to everything that I certainly could not afford to pay for myself. I love this from Joanna. Holiday dinner, each family brings a part of the meal. Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you all so much for sharing that. And I really do, I appreciate it. And I hope that folks feel empowered and feel a right to cooperation, because it is something that we all have had access to and have used. And I love to encourage people to see themselves in this field and in the sector that sometimes they might not. So thank you so much. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about, some co-op world history. Also want to take some time to talk about some local Philly history.
Some of the documents in your book.
Move to the next slide. Oh, okay. And again, these are a little text heavy. I won't read all of it. And I do encourage y'all to check out on PACA's website. This is, believe it or not, despite all the text on this page, this is only a little tidbit of all the history that has been captured, and our timeline stopped at 2011. And obviously we have continued to cooperate. So I really do encourage you, if you are a history buff or just curious and want to know more about what's been happening here, to check out our website. But some of the things that I will uplift. So in 1787, the Free African Society is founded in Philadelphia by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. And that is something, again, that Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nehmart talks about at length in her book. In 1829, workers in Philadelphia opened the first cooperative store on record in the United States. And I will transition from slides a little slower. In 1831, the earliest building and loan cooperative on record opens in Philadelphia. And also in 1869, the Knights of Labor is born in Philadelphia. And again, I'm very excited for Co-ops 102 and some more deep dive sessions. We're obviously staying a little high level, but I think that there is a lot to be said about cooperatives' relationships to labor. I am such a fan of the union co-ops, and I think folks are probably witnessing this beautiful wave of unionization, including in cooperatives. We support the REI union efforts here. And so I love to see, I just think it's important to lift up that cooperatives exist as a form to improve working conditions, and they are not magical fixes. And we hope to be side by side in partnership with unions and other labor efforts. So proud to see that represented here. Okay, in 1940, the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Federation, one of our predecessors, organized 70 study groups that spawned dozens of co-ops. And so that probably sounds familiar. This is in fact some of the activity that inspired PACA Study Circles program. And Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nehmart also talks about this tradition of folks coming together to study, right? And so it didn't necessarily look like the incubator programs that we have now, but people coming together to say, what's happening in my neighborhood? Could we address this issue a little better by working together? And so that was the inspiration for PACA's current study circles programs, which I think it's cool to be able to tie that back to a beautiful lineage. Some more history. In 1982, O&O supermarkets are created. And this again came from, oh, that is actually, I will take this time to mention it. We don't mention as a kind of cooperative co-ops that are converted from traditional businesses into cooperatives because it's not its own entity, but it is a method of beginning a co-op. Some people start from scratch. Some people might be incubated or supported by another outside entity to begin the co-op. And many cooperatives, more and more now, which is so exciting, are converting from, this is the traditional language, converting from non-cooperative businesses that are usually owned by one person, sole proprietorships, into cooperative businesses. And the O&O supermarkets is an example of that. And you can see we'll end here with, in 2011, PACA is formed, yay! And we've changed so much since we were first started, but again, proud to be here and to be one of many, many different organizations that are contributed to Philadelphia cooperative history and are continuing to move it forward, which cues up really well into this. Our cooperative present is what we make it. And I really just wanted to talk about here, we have a very varied history in terms of what cooperativism and cooperative social movements has looked like. And I am really excited about the role that PACA is playing in the cooperative movement and movements, because we know that there's not just one, and the way that it's shifting and changing. We're seeing more and more people join the cooperative movement, different kinds of people, really inspired by some work that's happening to organize folks who are incarcerated into cooperatives for agency and stability and growth and learning. I'm starting to see more and more cooperatives not just think about themselves as existing within the co-op bubble, but see themselves as part of a broader solidarity economy movement. And I know in the last few months, PACA held a solidarity economy assembly, and I would encourage y'all, if you're curious, if your appetite has been stoked, to please come back and join for some more of those events. The solidarity economy movement being a broad global movement to resist capitalism and build alternatives to it that serve all life and operate, instead of existing and, sorry, I'm finicky with my words, let me try again. That it's really centering all life and the earth's well-being instead of profit, growth. And so seeing co-ops exist in partnership within these broader movements, and seeing even these movements really think about how are we making sure we're not just doing business as usual. As I said earlier, co-ops or businesses, being a co-op doesn't automatically make you perfect or give you perfect values, right? Cooperation is really in the practice. And so I am enthused by people who are really excited about co-ops that are not just doing business as usual, that are really adhering to the principles and innovating. And I'll share, I know people enter into this movement for different reasons. Personally, I am really interested in cooperatives, and what drew me to them was their ability to provide tangible changes in agency and material conditions, and also to be a place and space for transformation. I think something that is really exciting about cooperatives is their ability to potentially be areas of practicing different ways that we want to be with each other. Sometimes people say new ways, sometimes people recognize that it's very old ways of being, actually really practicing care and non-extraction and community. And that's what's most exciting to me. And that to me is co-ops at their best, is actually being this place to practice. And my hope is that by joining a co-op, by cooperating, we're able to practice, distributing resources among ourselves, making hard decisions, having hard conversations, and all of those things are skill building opportunities that I hope, as we contest for power, as we resist the systems that are not serving us or this earth, that if we are able to practice in cooperatives, when we win, we'll know how to govern ourselves. And so just to share, that's a little bit about what really draws me to them, and what's exciting. And I can't wait to see the cooperative present that we all build together with our own unique skills and backgrounds and contributions. Wonderful. And with I worked a little faster than I thought I would. I'm so glad. So this is the end of the formal presentation. I would love to hear from you all. What else would you like to know? What questions do you still have? I'm glad I ended with enough time to be really spacious. Again, obviously this was high level and there's so much more to cover. And I hope to be able to do a little bit of that in discussion. But before I stop screen sharing, I really want to lift up, I love this cute little doodle. I got this from SELC, the Sustainable Economies Law Center based in California. They're an organization of lawyers that do amazing solidarity economy work and cooperative work. And I really love this vision of what a neighborhood, a community, a main street could be, where you have a worker-owned cooperative cafe, you have a cooperative solar project, and a bike co-op store in the bottom, a seed library, a credit union. You have a permanent housing cooperative where people are living together and sharing their resources and not worried about eviction or being kicked out of their homes, and a child care cooperative as well to take care of the youth, the bebés. So I wanted to make sure that I read that out so we could also have those titles interpreted. And with that, I'll stop screen sharing and I will be more able to monitor the chat, but I also welcome people to come off mute and share, what were your reactions to that? And then again, what questions do you still have about co-ops that you want to discuss?
Maria in the chat asked how to inspire people interested in starting a business to instead start a co-op from the ground up.
Such a great question. And I have a million thoughts. So I feel like maybe I'll talk systemically and then talk about in the interpersonal. I am really excited and motivated by folks who are organizing within their cities to more and more incorporate cooperative education into workforce development programs. I think that that's so important. And to be able to shift the perception of cooperatives as this like weird thing that some people do over there to a business form that is as considered as any kind of business, right? But because we don't often see those things represented except by maybe organizations like PACA or others that are sort of doing their own thing, I think it reinforces that sense that co-ops are odd or co-ops aren't a real option. So I think being able to have, city-supported education programs, having things folded into workforce development and youth work that happens at the city, so that earlier and earlier people are being introduced to cooperation and being able to practice is a huge thing that I know lots of people are organizing for. And then I think interpersonally, or maybe that's not even the right category for it, I do think, hopefully reaching out to your local co-op development organization. I know something PACA is really excited to do as we step into this area of having more capacity is building relationships with folks who do tend to work with non-cooperative businesses, but have these strong relationships in the community, right? Folks who've been doing community development and small business development forever, ever. And being able to work with them and partner and offering these sorts of 101s, right, that hopefully will reach more and more people, being able to weave in cooperation and explainers about what it could look like into some of the financial boot camps and other things that happen. I do think it's that dual. We hope to see systemic change so that we're not always having to pop up and work against the stream. Paired with, the education work that orgs like PACA does, and paired with hopefully, more arts and media that are reflecting cooperatives and really changing the culture, and continuing to uplift co-ops as a part of them. That would be my answer to that. Looking through the chat, does PACA have any specific resources or advice for turning existing business into a co-op? Yes, so PACA doesn't specialize in conversion, but we absolutely can refer you to folks who do. I do think some, again, like ground floor 101 is always helpful. And there are development support organizations, which is sort of how I think of PACA, who do specialize in conversion. And I think the first thing to do is, if you are chatting with workers who are interested, is to refer them to one of those organizations who can come in, do an assessment, check to see, you know, is this, how likely is it that this conversion can happen? Is there a friendly departing owner who would be willing to work with the workers? Maybe reduce the sale price so that workers have a real shot at buying out the business. Maybe be patient with the kind of turnover. Do you have a worker, a business owner who would be willing to do some of the training to make sure that the business actually does survive after the owner leaves? Those are some things that I think are really important keys to success for conversion, though it has been done. And I applaud and look to Argentina as examples of some hostile takeovers where the workers are just like, this is ours now. That is challenging to do, right? Because you have often these long histories of customer relationships, of the knowledge that you build when you own your own business, that we, if possible, want to make sure workers have access to that. So I'm sure that I know that there are some resources on our website for that. I'll also shout out some local partners like the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops that has clinics for people who are starting to think about it, and also plays a connecting role. So that I think you're already doing the right thing by asking that question, and it's plugging in with an org who can direct you to somebody who specializes it, because there are some really particular things that come up when you're thinking about conversion. Yes, I also see from Maria, SBA is supporting co-ops now as the legal structure it is, which, let me tell you, was a fight. People have been organizing to get that to happen. And some folks might not be familiar. Often within cooperatives, and this is a benefit of them, is that you don't have just one person on the hook, right? The ownership and the risk, the liability is split among workers and held within the business, which is one of the reasons why co-ops can be so transformative and meaningful, and a way for folks who are shut out of the traditional job business to be able to access work and stability. But the SBA is used to non-cooperative businesses where there's one person who's responsible, who can sign a personal guarantee, right? So if the loan goes bad, the business isn't successful, the SBA can say, well, I'm coming after you and I'm taking everything you got. And co-ops don't want to do that. There isn't one person who's just responsible and on the hook. And so because of that, co-ops were not included and able to access loans that would be really meaningful and really, really helpful. So that is happening more and more. It is still sometimes a little bit of a hassle and a bureaucracy when you're working with practitioners who are not familiar with co-ops. And so that's part of the work that we're doing here at PACA. And I really want to shout out Corey, who's been holding our community of practice work. And so, you know, in addition to working with cooperatives and the fans, we're also working to build relationships with any co-op curious practitioner, so that more and more, you know, you don't have to be a co-op expert, but if somebody mentions something to you, you might be able to give a 1 or 2 sentence definition instead of turning them away because you're unfamiliar with the business structure, or it doesn't make sense. So that education of all kinds of practitioners, I think, is important. And I'll also mention that's why you see more and more the rise of co-op specific lenders, which I think has been a lifesaver for cooperative businesses. Entities like Seed Commons doing non-extractive funding, and there are also scattered across the states, and again, outside of the states, co-op specific and co-op friendly lenders. I'll lift up, I'm on the board of the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast that does a lot of lending in New England and in parts of upstate New York. And there are others across the states who, again, really know co-ops, are able to ask questions on forums that can be answered by co-ops, and are familiar with the structure and some of the particularities of what comes up when you're a cooperative business. Awesome. Oh, I love these questions. These are great. I'm just going to keep rolling. Joanna asks, what are the barriers to co-ops? Does a place like Wharton Business School teach about this model? My answer to that is I don't think so. Or if they do, it's a one-off class, right? Or it's a specialty area as opposed to integrated into what traditional business students are being taught. I think that there are so many barriers, and we've talked about some of them. One is, right, the education, that cooperatives are seen as specialized field and not as a regular form of business. So a lot of people don't know about them or are discouraged out of them because they are not familiar business forms. That impacts both education and a pipeline of people who are interested, in addition to accessing resources. And I do think it is meaningful to mention something that comes up in, I know this comes up in food co-ops, and sometimes when it comes to issues of management, that because that there is not this strong, we are not constantly talking about co-ops, and everybody's learning about co-ops in their schools and training programs. Co-ops can sometimes struggle to find like qualified managers who also understand cooperative values, right, and are carrying that as important. So I think also a big barrier that faces co-ops is just, we have right now a limited pipeline or a limited pool of people who know about co-ops, who have the important skills, business and values wise, to operate a co-op. And so co-ops can struggle, like with any other business, with turnover, but maybe have a harder battle to fight in terms of finding people who can support them. I think we talked also about some of the policy barriers around co-ops, having them not be recognized for so long, meaning that we've had to incorporate in some forms that maybe aren't ideal. We've continued to innovate, and more states have statutes where people can incorporate as cooperatives and cooperative corporations. But there is plenty of work to be done on the policy front. And I will, again, locally lift up the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, and their focus is on worker co-ops, but they are obviously in partnerships with folks across all sectors, and they're doing a ton of work to really shift the policy landscape at the local and state and national level. And then in terms of maybe some more grounded barriers or challenges that exist within co-ops, I do think a really big one is that for many people, being in a co-op is the first time where they actually have say. They actually have agency and control over what happens. And I think that can often sort of go in two ways. One is that folks are scared or shy to step up. They don't actually trust that this is a situation where they get to be in charge and where their opinion is valued. Also, if they don't have the training or education or support, there can be a steep on-ramp into learning that can be discouraging. And on the other side of that, I think is that, and I feel like I felt that right away, or when I first joined cooperatives as well, that because I was not used to having a say, because I was not used to actually being in charge, it can, sorry. Actually, I'm going to pause for 1 second. I lost my train of thought. I want to get it back. Yes, okay. I was talking about not having the training and education and being hesitant to participate, or maybe going the other way. Now, when people have a lot of power, they're like, ooh, I'm in charge. And we're practicing, despite being in this new form, we're actually showing up the same way that we would show up in some of these other spaces, and practicing some of the not great values, the tendencies into domination or control in our cooperatives, which I think is understandable, right? In a broader culture that really says, like, the way you get ahead is to maximize and to take charge. And if somebody is taking longer to learn something, you should kick them out and get somebody who's more efficient. You can sometimes see those sorts of values still creeping in, which to me, I think is such a detriment to what a co-op can be. And so there really is that cultural piece as well that I think is often de-emphasized or seen as less important as it relates to the finances. And we do want salient businesses, especially if you have folks who are putting more on the line to be in the co-op. We don't want people to come in and risk their livelihood, right, for no reason. And I think it is just as important to make sure you have a culture that actually supports some change. in a way of being that is beneficial for the members of the co-op. I feel like I could talk forever about that, but maybe I'll stop there with barriers. Okay. Ooh, so many great things in the chat. Have I heard of disparate groups of people in the same business theme forming a co-op together? Maria, are you able to come off mute and say a little bit more about this question?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, I work for the University of Texas Small Business Development Center, and I'm really happy to be able to kind of bring the idea of co-ops to my clients, most of whom are not aware of it because we're not Austin or a bigger city. So what I'm doing is I'm offering these webinars akin to this one, and I have an attorney that provides some legal context for co-op starting in Texas. And so my idea is I don't just want to give these intro webinars as good as they are, as needed as they are. I want to build off of them by reaching out to my clients according to the industry they're in or interested in, and seeing if, you know, hey, let's do a working meeting. Let's have a conversation. You know, do you think we might be able to work together? You share some goals. Are you willing to, you know, work together and kind of build from scratch as a group? Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Thank you so much for that added context. My answer to that is yes, that absolutely does happen. And I think, again, in varying levels of formality, depending on how well the business owners might know each other or trust each other or how different their business operations are, I think that could really come. An example that I might offer is around shared purchasing or back-end services. And there are examples, there are many examples, but I'll just talk about the thing where maybe the businesses come together and are chatting about, okay, which is how many and most co-ops start, is like, what are the issues that are plaguing us? Maybe it's we need to drive customers together, or running ads is getting expensive, or our wholesale delivery doesn't come to our area anymore because we're not ordering enough products. And so I would sort of start that conversation off by saying, you know, what are the issues that are coming up, and could working together, could forming a cooperative address them? And it doesn't mean, and what I appreciate about the purchasing cooperative or buying clubs is that you don't have to change your existing business entity to work together. And I think that often is an incentive, right? It's like, oh, you could keep doing your thing, but maybe you go in and you purchase supplies together, or you start a new contract as a separate entity, as this purchasing co-op, to negotiate with wholesalers or delivery. And so, or maybe it's you're doing the books and you want to actually just pay an accountant altogether, and you can save money that way. And so I think that is fairly common, or that I know that absolutely has been done. And I assume if you've got some different kinds of businesses in the same theme, that some shared back end services or shared purchasing might be a good fit to offer to people. And whether they do that in a legal entity or in a practice, I think it could be great to bring to people. And yeah, maybe I'll stop there, and would be happy to, if that is of interest. I'll throw out again the Community Purchasing Alliance. That is a group that I know that they are in Boston, they're developing in DC, and I think in another state as well. But just an example that you can share with people of a community of people coming together to purchase. And I know that there was some efforts to do that kind of organizing here in Philly. I also know some efforts to organize with corner stores in Boston, but I would be happy to follow up with you, Maria, with some links and some resources if you want to share.
Yes, thank you so much. Like I just want to say quickly that, yeah, I have a lot of clients that are struggling to get loans, right? They all want to open bakeries or coffee shops or things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of room for it. So I will, if you put your email, I'll send you an email, and I would appreciate yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I am just kind of going chronologically through this chat. I welcome folks also to come off mute if you're worried that I'm going to miss your question. I see from Adrian a question about the CLI program. So it is not running, sorry, let me say, the CLI program is the Cooperative Leadership Institute. It's a program that PACA has run in the past for cooperative members to come together and do training. And so we had folks from all different member co-ops in and outside of Philly coming together to learn things like how do we navigate conflict in our workplace, talking about maybe we're skilling up on our finances. And so that program is in an off year right now because we're doing a 2-year cycle of study circles, but we hope to bring it back. And in the meantime, I'll lift up that the Federation, the US Federation of Worker Co-ops is running a skill up clinic that is happening in May, and correct me if I'm wrong about that, Corey, happening in early May. And the 3 tracks are around navigating conflict, like a worker co-op finance 101. And, ooh, Corey, do you know off the top of your head? There's one more. But they're I recommend checking it out, and maybe someone is able to put the link in the chat. But there are opportunities to continue to skill up and learn while we wait for CLI to come back. And so that is an opportunity that's coming up soon. And we'll also mention, we'll be continuing to do these public education workshops. So hopefully that will also be a space for you and anyone to come and continue to learn and grow. The last question that I see, and then I'll open it up in case there's any more, and we're getting close to wrapping time, is are there any specific resources for artist co-ops and or existing groups in Philly you could direct us to? So I think artist co-ops are so exciting and so important, recognizing that art is an undervalued but essential part of our culture, and artists are often really, really struggling to make ends meet. I'll lift up some things generally, and then I'm happy to share some Philly local examples. I would encourage you to check out art.coop. That is, and I believe that art.coop might also be their name on Instagram in addition to their website. But that is a group of artists who have come together to sort of like gather data and talk about the way that artists are undervalued. One of their taglines, I think they mentioned, is that like artists should not be starving. We want to do away with that. And so that's groups of people who are organizing together to shift, I think, philanthropy, public perception around art and arts funding, in addition to doing some tangible organizing together. I know that there are some really cool arts and media co-ops. I know that there is, and I wish that the name was at the tip of my tongue, there's an amazing alternative to Spotify that is a cooperative streaming platform, which folks may or may not know. Spotify, I think, is notorious, but as well as many other of these larger conglomerates, unsurprisingly, right, are really, really actually giving very little to the artists and taking a lot of the profit. And so there's efforts for independent artists to come together and to build tech and platforms to meet the need and also support the artist. The Federation has been, and when I say the Federation, I'm referring to the US Federation of Worker Co-ops based here in Philly, but national. They have begun and are supporting an effort called Gilded Cooperative, which is an opportunity for gig workers to come together and form a cooperative. And some of the tools that exist there are things like having a shared pool of funds to cover the time in between maybe the first deposit and the end. I think gig workers are notoriously exploited, whether that is super late payments, making people have to chase clients for the money that they deserve, in addition to underpayment. And so that's an effort for some folks to come together. And locally in Philly, I want to uplift one of our members, Obvious Agency. They are a cooperative that does amazing work. They do public art, they do theater and games, and just, I think, a cool example of an art cooperative based here in Philly. And I am going to pause because I'm not the only person who knows things in this room. And I'm curious, Corey, Alex, or anybody else calling in from Philly if there are other resources that you would want to uplift, examples or resources.
I think that was very thorough, but there are definitely lots of like artist cooperatives out there, like which are, you know, in the ethos of cooperativism. So yeah, you know, we definitely embrace as part of like solidarity economy, like all the folks that are coming together to like work towards like horizontal participation, even if they aren't, you know, as Amethyst talks so beautifully about, like it's part of the ethos of cooperatives, even if it's not technically incorporated. So yeah. And I know Alex knows a ton if they're able to come off.
And no pressure. These are really helpful questions, and we can do our best to try to tailor some resources also in our follow-up emails. I love the Q&A. You always, I always find that they prompt things in me that I haven't thought about in a while. The gig worker co-op is called Gilded, Guilded, like gold. Wonderful. We're just about at time, and we like to be respectful, even give time back if we're able to. But before we close and maybe do some closing announcements, are there any other questions that people have? Or maybe even topics for a next event or workshop that you'd be interested in? Both would be really welcome. And thank you, Joanna. Building from the ground up, assuming that we're talking about startup cooperatives and how to start up a cooperative. Awesome. We will definitely do that. And again, we'll refer for worker-owned cooperatives. The Federation has a monthly webinar where anybody who's thinking about starting up a co-op is able to attend and get some feedback and resources. And I'll also highlight that on our PACA website, we have a ton of resources. I think while we love to work closely with groups that are starting, there's a lot out there about DIY co-ops. If you're scrappy and you have the time and the energy, there's a ton of resources and self-guided things that I would encourage people to look at as well. And please attend these workshops and work with us for technical assistance if you want. Okay, I won't belabor the pause. Thank you all so much for attending. This was really lovely. You asked wonderful questions. And this is the first in a series of public-facing events. I'm really excited, hopefully, to do some 102s, some deep dives in other areas. And we'll also have other events going on. I know Corey mentioned in the chat that we have our community of practice session around lawyers. We work with lawyers, bookkeepers, and accountants. We're going to be engaging with some funders and lenders and people doing finance in this space. There's just a lot of opportunities to continue to learn and build with us and organize our local Philly ecosystem. So if you aren't already following us on Instagram, on Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletter, would love to have you do that. We're beefing up our social media presence, and so hopefully reaching more and more folks. I think the amount of people who registered and showed up today is evidence of that. And it was really wonderful to have you. Thank you to everyone on the PACA team who supported this. Thank you so much to our wonderful interpreters who have been interpreting this whole time. Thank you to our translators who helped us make this bilingual presentation. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night and hope to see you at the next event. Thank you, everybody.